Hello once again, friends, neighbors, and fellow Christians, and welcome back to our ministry here at What the Bible Says, and to another video in this series where we are debunking the typical objections that are raised against all things fulfilled. And so, again, I hope you won't forget to smash the like button. If you're new to the channel, first time you've ever seen this channel, I hope that you'll subscribe, click the little bell icon so you'll receive notifications every time we upload a video, and that you'll share our videos out with your friends and your neighbors and so forth, and help us to get the word out that we're just trying to study the Bible. We're not interested in your money. We're trying to encourage people to study the Bible in its context. And so in our previous video, we exposed, and we've been dealing with some of the material that has been presented and brought up by Brother Cougan Collins. And again, I appreciate his thorough layout. It's very efficient to read, and that helps in going through his material. But as I said in the previous video, we exposed Brother Collins' blatant dishonesty as he accused me of believing that all eschatological prophecies were fulfilled in AD 70, even after, and I quoted his words, even after he had cited my position correctly that all prophecy would be fulfilled by the fall of the temple. And so he has quoted me accurately, but then he builds this humongous straw man and falsely accuses me of something. And anyway, we've pointed that out. And again, as I stated in the previous video, this is going to be a short series within this series of debunking these objections, where it's kind of the disclaimer, I guess. I'm asking you, and I'm telling you, I'm not asking you to believe my position. That is, that all things have been fulfilled. That's not the point of this little series, mini-series, because I want you to be honest in your assessment of Brother Collins's hermeneutic versus my hermeneutic. And again, to restate that, my hermeneutic is, I take what the passage says, in context obviously, but I take what the passage says. And as I pointed out in the previous video, the verse was Luke 21:22. Jesus said, when you see Jerusalem encircled with armies, know that the desolation thereof is nigh. That's verse 20. Verse 22 then, for these be the days of vengeance in which all things that are written are to be fulfilled. All right, I take that passage just as it's worded, just as Jesus said that. That is my position. I'm not interpreting the passage. And so Brother Collins' position is, his hermeneutic is, he takes that verse and he reconstructs it, he redefines it, and he forges it into, he changes the text. He inserts his qualifier into the text. And that is, all things that are written about the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple. And so he qualifies what the text says so that he can manipulate other portions of the text. And so this is the point that I'm trying to get across. I want you, the viewers, to weigh not our paradigms. I mean, you may not agree with either the futurist position or the all things fulfilled, but you may not agree with either one of them. That's okay. I want you to assess honestly our hermeneutics. All right? And so that brings us to the second point in the several points that we're going to be covering. He's provided quite a bit of material. But so once again, we need to do a backdrop, which brings us up to the present. And that is, I had asked Brother Collins, where in the Old Testament does it speak about the end of the material cosmos? And see, I believe this is a legitimate question. I believe that it is critical that if one cannot find the prophecy of the end of the material cosmos in Moses and the prophets in the Old Testament, then there's no basis for us to come to the New Testament and insert that idea into the words of the apostles and even Jesus himself. Because, as I've said, Jesus was a Hebrew prophet, all right? He was preaching to a Hebrew audience out of the Hebrew Scriptures. And so if Jesus foretold the end of the material cosmos, then it has to be found in the law and the prophets. And Jesus was going to send the Comforter on the apostles to bring all things to their remembrance, whatever he had said. So again, whatever they said was a reiteration of what Jesus had taught them. So that brings us back to the same fact. And that is that if the end of time and the end of the material cosmos cannot be found in the Old Testament, then it can't be found in the New Testament. And that would force the conclusion that man is inserting that idea into the New Testament and into the eschatological texts. Okay, so that's the question that I had asked Brother Collins, and that was the basis of my question. And I believe Brother Collins sees how critical this is, because he has attempted to demonstrate from Old Testament texts that it does in fact predict the end of material creation. And he has offered Isaiah 51:6, Psalms 102, 25 and 26, Isaiah 65:17, and Isaiah 66 verse 22, as well as Daniel 12:2. And so we're going to look at each one of these, not in this video. I'm just going to be looking at the first one today in this video. Try to keep it short for you so I don't hold you very long. And then probably can cover the other three in the next video. But we'll see. I'll see how that see how it shakes out. Since we're talking about shaking of heaven and earth, pun intended there. All right, so as I said, these are the passages that Brother Collins has appealed to assert the idea that the Moses and the prophets foretold of the end of material creation, and that he's doing that to lead into the disciples' question in the Olivet Discourse of Matthew 24:3, so that he can manipulate. Let's not use that word yet. So that he can claim that the question and of the end of the age, that then the disciples were asking about the end of the material cosmos. And therefore, that allows him to say, well, now Jesus is answering this after verse 36. So we'll get to that. Excuse me. And so, as I said, Brother Collins offered Isaiah 51 and verse 6. And, I mean, I was literally shocked when I read the passages that he offered up. And I think I said something in one comment like, are you serious? Are you kidding? Or something like that. But anyway, I said that now this is based on the implication of Brother Collins saying Isaiah 51:6 is foretelling the end of the material cosmos. All right? So I said, if Isaiah 51 is predicting the end of the material creation, why would God say that his righteousness will be from generation to generation in verse 8? I went on to say to Brother Collins, I thought it was your position that there will be no marrying and giving in marriage in heaven. So how will there be generation after generation? And I asked Brother Collins the question, will fornication be permitted in heaven? Okay. So Brother Collins said, well, I see where you're coming from, but your argument, I didn't make an argument. Anyway, but your argument completely misrepresents Isaiah 51:8 and the broader biblical teaching on eschatology. Let's break it down. All right, I'm all for that. Show me. That is my motto, folks. Show me. Exegetically, not feelings and opinions and so forth, pretext and so. Show me exegetically how I'm wrong, and I'll change, because I've demonstrated it many times in the past. Okay, so Brother Collins, he quotes the verse, and the verse says, For the moth shall eat them up like a garment, and the worm shall eat them like wool. But my righteousness shall be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. So that's the verse that I said, how can there be generation after generation in eternity? Especially since Brother Collins' position is, correctly, there will be no marriages in eternity. All right, so now Brother Collins says, now watch this. Brother Collins says, you are arguing that this phrase means human generations must continue indefinitely. And again, I was literally dumbfounded when I read this, because literally in the first half of Brother Collins' sentence, and going to show me how I'm misinterpreting the verse, he has created a straw man. I never typed the first syllable in reference to human generations continuing indefinitely. I never said that. And I didn't make an argument, not on that. I just asked a contextual question based on the unavoidable implication of his attempted application of this verse, or this passage, verse 6. This is verse 8. Okay, so let's go on. He says, you are arguing that this phrase means human generations must continue indefinitely, but that's simply not what the text is saying. Yeah, well, duh. Now notice this, you gotta watch this. The contrast in the verse is between the perishable nature of the wicked and the everlasting nature of God's righteousness. So, I mean, you just got to catch the irony here, in that in the first sentence, halfway through, he has built a straw man, and halfway through the second sentence, he has refuted his entire position that the Old Testament predicts the end of material creation. How so? Glad you asked. Because Brother Collins has just said the contrast in the verse is between the perishable nature of the wicked and the only thing perishable in the context is the heavens and the earth. And he has just refuted all of these passages, not just this one, all of them, because they're all speaking to the same thing, the passing away of the heavens and the earth. So he has just given up his entire document. He has just surrendered the entire thing in the second sentence of him trying to tell me how that I am misinterpreting the verse. Let's go on. And again, you got to pay attention and catch this, folks. So he said, you're arguing that the phrase means human generations must continue indefinitely, but that's simply not what the text is saying. The contrast in the verse is between the perishable nature of the wicked and the everlasting nature of God's righteousness. Now watch. Quote, generation to generation is not about endless human procreation. It is an assurance that God's salvation will remain valid for as long as the world lasts. Did you catch that? Let me read that again. It's an assurance that God's salvation will remain valid for as long as the world lasts. So, since Brother Collins, since his hermeneutic and his position is that the world is not going to last forever, and that when the world ends then, again, this is the unavoidable conclusion of his words, then when the world ends, the validity of God's salvation will cease. I mean, there's no way around it. That's what the text says. All right? And that's what Brother Collins says about the text. And you see, again, when the world ends, according to Brother Collins, the validity of God's righteousness, His salvation, will last as long as the world lasts. So when the world ends, per Brother Collins, then the unavoidable conclusion is that God's righteousness will no longer be valid. So, once again, Brother Collins has just given up his appeal to Isaiah 51 and verse 6, as well as Psalms 102, Isaiah 65:17, Isaiah 66 and verse 22, and Daniel 12:2. And folks, here's the kicker. Brother Collins says, correctly, Brother Collins says that Matthew 24, verse 35 applies to AD 70. What is verse 35? That is where Jesus said, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall never pass away. And Brother Collins has applied that to AD 70. And the only my breakfast. The only application that can be made from those words is that it is covenantal language. Jesus is contrasting His eternal words, covenant, versus what? Heaven and earth. So what was going to pass away? The Mosaic covenant. Heaven and earth is the Mosaic covenant. Again, I mean, that's the only conclusion to be made. Because Brother Collins applied that verse to AD 70, and we're still here. All right? So, again, I'm asking that you ask yourself the question as to why I never have misrepresented what Brother Collins says. And if you'll recall in the last video, I even said that if any of you think that I have misrepresented him, then leave comments down below explaining how, not feelings and emotions and so forth, tantrums and so forth, no, explain how that I have misrepresented anything that Brother Collins has said, or the unavoidable implication of what he says. And so again, I'm asking you to ask yourself the question as you compare our hermeneutics. Get my tongue tangled up here. Why is it that I have never contradicted myself? Why is it that I have never misrepresented what Brother Collins says? Why is it that I never build strawman arguments, even though he accuses me of that in this document? When I asked him the question, will there be fornication in heaven, because he says there be no marriages in heaven, but there has to be generation after generation. And so that was not my argument. That was a contextual question based on the implication of his attempted application of this text. It wasn't an argument. And so again, why is it that even though he does make the accusation that he doesn't use the word manipulate, but that I selectively read and misread the text and think, but he can't prove it. He can say that, but he hasn't demonstrated it. His main thrust is anything I say, like Luke 21:22, well, that's just your interpretation, and my interpretation is better than your interpretation. No, I'm not giving an interpretation. My position is what that verse says. And with these passages here, my position is what the context reveals and what the text says. And so, as we've seen here, Brother Collins does all of these things. He builds straw man arguments. He contradicts himself. He manipulates what the texts say, and then come up with these absurd, impossible conclusions. And so, literally in 3 consecutive sentences, Brother Collins has employed all of these fallacies because his doctrine is false. And his doctrine cannot exist without these straw man arguments and redefining the texts out of the ignoring the context. So again, that's what I'm asking you to weigh our hermeneutics. I don't care, I do, but for this point, it's irrelevant whether you agree with me or not. If all things are fulfilled, that's not the point. The point is who is using the proper and the consistent and the honest hermeneutic. All right, again, I said, and I've said this a couple of times, that Isaiah 51:8 says, "My righteousness shall be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation." But if according to you, I'm talking to Brother Collins now, so if according to Brother Collins, the end of time brings an eternal state with no future generations, then how can there be generation after generation in heaven? I mean, is this not a legitimate question? And so Brother Collins built a straw man halfway into the very first sentence. Then he refuted his appeal to this text by admitting that the heavens and the earth, which would perish, is the perishable nature of the wicked, which falsifies his attempted application of this passage as the destruction of the material heavens and the earth. And then Brother Collins posits that God's salvation will no longer be valid when his imaginary end of time occurs because, again, in Brother Collins' own words now, it is an assurance that God's salvation will remain valid for as long as the world lasts. Those are his words, and I just read them to you multiple times. And then on top of all of this, Brother Collins totally, 100% ignored my actual argument that I did make. Because I referred to Isaiah 51:6-8. And then I pointed to verse 16, which explicitly defines the heavens and the earth that was going to supplant the perishing heavens and earth as Zion, God's people. Yes, Brother Collins totally ignored my argument. Let's read that verse, shall we? A minute to find it here. See if I can get my arm extensions going here. Oh, let's see. All right, so verse 16 says, "I have put my words in your mouth, and I have covered you in the shadow of my hand." Why? "That I may plant the heavens and lay the foundations of the earth, and say unto Zion, Thou art my people." Did you see that, folks? Did you catch that? The new heavens and earth is Zion, which God specifically identified as his people. Now, the question being begged here is, why did Brother Collins not offer the first keystroke of a response to my actual argument? So again, folks, let's lay aside doctrine. It's irrelevant whether you agree with me or not on all things fulfilled. Whose hermeneutic is valid here? My position is that this chapter is covenantal language, which is foretelling the passing away of the old heavens and earth, that is, the Mosaic covenant, when the new heavens and the earth, the new Jerusalem, would come into being, bringing everlasting righteousness, like Daniel 9:24 and following says which Brother Collins has admitted was fulfilled in AD 70. And so Brother Collins has inadvertently confirmed my position by admitting that the only thing which is perishing in this chapter was to be the perishable nature of the wicked, and that God was going to plant the new heavens and the new earth, that is, a new covenant, identifying Zion as his people. And remember, Paul said in Hebrews 12, he told his audience, you have arrived at Mount Zion, the heavenly city, the church of the firstborn. You have arrived, not you shall arrive. You have arrived at Mount Zion. And so watch this, folks. The very next verse. The very next verse says, all right, verse 16, again, I have put my words in your mouth, I have covered you in the shadow of my hand, that I may plant the heavens and lay the foundations of the earth, and say unto Zion, thou art my people. Awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem, which has drunk at the hand of the Lord the cup of his fury. You have drunken the dregs of the cup of trembling and wrung them out. Who drunk the cup of the Lord's fury, folks? It's not even debatable. That was Israel. That's why John the Baptist said, when he saw the Pharisees coming to his baptism, who has warned you to flee from the wrath about to come? That's why Paul would say in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 that the Judaizing teachers who had crucified the Lord and is persecuting us, Paul says, persecuting the Thessalonians because of their faith, he says, the wrath is come upon them to the uttermost. O Jerusalem. You see, that's the old Jerusalem. That's the heavens and the earth. That's the perishable nature of the wicked. The wicked that has drunk the cup of the Lord's fury. And again, this is projected into the last days. So, once again, folks, Brother Collins displays an abject disregard for my argument and builds a straw man, then refutes his own appeal to this chapter, then says that someday in our future, God's salvation will no longer be valid. Now again, he didn't say that in those words, but that is the unavoidable implication of what he did say, and I read it for you. And so Brother Collins' admission that what was perishing was the nature of the wicked, then he has likewise validated my argument that the heavens and the earth, that is Zion, that is God's people, is the context here, and not the demise of the material cosmos. So again, even if you don't agree with me that all things have been fulfilled, you should be appalled at Brother Collins' declaration here that the validity of God's salvation will only last as long as the physical world lasts. That's what he said. Folks, you need to let that soak in for a while. And you need to let it percolate for a while. And I suggest, humbly, that this is a worse blunder by Brother Collins than when he was trying to argue the phrase peri de in Matthew 24:36 and said it switches topics. It's consistent with peri de in 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 1. And he blundered in divorcing the day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night of chapter 5 from the day of the Lord coming in the clouds and the resurrection of chapter 4. He had to back up and punt on that one. And he switched 180 degrees and said it is not, it's a shift in focus, not topic. And then back in this document right here, he's back to saying it's a shift in topic. We'll get to that, Lord willing, as we go on. So again, that's what I'm saying, folks. Regardless of whether you agree with me that all things are fulfilled, weigh the hermeneutic. Why does Brother Collins' hermeneutic force him to be identified as a double-minded man, saying it is, then it's not, but it is. Why is my hermeneutic consistently the same all the time? I don't interpret a passage. I let the text speak for itself. I let the Bible interpret itself. Like Paul said in 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 13, I believe it is, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. I let the scriptures define themselves. Just like Luke 21:22, where Jesus said, "These be the days of vengeance, that all things that are written are to be fulfilled." That's my position. My hermeneutic is, take that just for what it says. That by the fall of the temple, then all eschatological prophecies were fulfilled. That's my hermeneutic. Brother Collins's hermeneutic is, he has to redesign that, take it back to the drawing board, fabricate a qualifier and insert that into the text so he can condense it all into one little localized physical event, destruction of the city and the temple, and ignore my actual argument that the judgment that occurred at that time extended all the way back to Abel, and we covered that in the past video. All right. So again, folks, weigh the hermeneutic. Who's using a consistent hermeneutic here? All right, and that is the focus of this lesson. And so, as we bring this lesson to a close, you certainly will not want to miss the next video to see if Brother Collins fares any better with his appeals to Psalms 102 and Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66 and Daniel 12:2, as he tries to apply those as a future destruction of the material cosmos. Okay? All right, so until our next scheduled or unscheduled video, making these videos and debunking these objections is not really scheduled like a Sunday morning lesson. But until our next video, until our next lesson, folks, I pray that God will bless you richly in your study of His Word, and you all stay warm and you have a blessed day. Thank you so much for your time.